I'm Stan Salett. I'm a long weekender in Chestertown. My permanent residence is in D.C., which I describe as the show business capital of the world, and try to spend as much time out here as I possibly can. I have a problem retiring. I seem to fail each time I try it. I've just finished a book that's basically a memoir that I'm titling Politics on the Edge, Stories from the Civil Rights Movement, the War and Poverty, and the Challenges of School Reform. So I describe in the book how I grew up in Boston and very much involved on the political side. My uncle served on the city council when James Michael Curley was mayor. He represented Ward 14, and his law partner was the state representative. And every 4th of July, there'd be a major parade down Blue Hill Avenue. And for a couple of years, I was given a little flag and put in front of the parade. And I thought it was because I was so good looking. It was only years later that I found out it was part of a political payoff. I should have learned that a lot earlier. While working on a dissertation, I had a number of options where I could teach at Newark State Teachers College and work for the ILGWU or work in the Labor Department in the Kennedy administration. And it was New Frontier time, and so I came to Washington, as so many others of my age group did, and I was very fortunate to work for President Kennedy on the President's Committee on Youth Employment. And that major task was to support two pieces of legislation put in by then Senator Hubert Humphrey, one called the Youth Conservation Corps and the other called the Neighborhood Youth Corps. Neither legislation was going to go anywhere because even though President Kennedy was a Democrat and there was a democratically controlled House and Senate, they were Southern Democrats and he was a Northern Democrat. And none of his legislation was going to go anywhere. He did manage to get the Peace Corps through, and he managed to get another piece of legislation through called the Juvenile Delinquency Program. And there was another presidential committee called the President's Committee on Juvenile Delinquency, headed by Bobby Kennedy, and I was recruited from one presidential committee to another, and so I worked for Bobby Kennedy. And that was quite an experience. My major job was to oversee the education components of what now would be called a community action agency, or a comprehensive approach to dealing with a lot of the symptoms and causes of juvenile delinquency. And then when the war on poverty began, I was asked, well, really told by Bobby Kennedy to take an assignment at the task force against poverty. Before there was the Office of Economic Opportunity, and I wound up then being housed in the then U.S. Office of Education and wrote some of the education provisions of the Economic Opportunity Act. Well, the two programs that I was most closely associated with, Headstart and then Upward Bound, which basically I started, have really held on. I mean, like this year, there are 65,000 students in Upward Bound. Probably over the last 40 years, must be well over 1 million kids have gone through it, and the results have been quite remarkable. Kids of low-income background with Upward Bound experience get into college more frequently, they stay in college more often, and they graduate. All the way back when we were drafting the guidelines and back to the legislation, there were two very powerful prohibitions against the federal government doing too much in education. One was the fear of federal aid to education, that it was not the proper role of the federal government to support education, which we interpreted education during the regular school day. And the second issue was the church-state issue, to try to stay away from that. So when defining the guidelines, the education guidelines for a community action agency, I basically worked around the regular school day and the regular school year So the focus was on early childhood development before school, formal school began, after school programs, and summer school programs. And so, in a sense, the regular school day, the faculty, the teachers, all that administration, and so weren't directly threatened. Now, Upward Bound gets a little bit into that because some of it does occur during the school year, but on an after-school basis, where kids can be brought to college campuses or graduate students come into the community and help tutor kids and prepare them for the college experience. Well, there's always been controversy in education. There've always been some issues that have threatened public education, but probably none as seriously as now. I mean, the base of public education has been the common school. It was a place where people of all classes, all races, all backgrounds could come together in a common experience and help mold the future of the country. And the public schools are suffering along with a lot of other public institutions that have similar purposes. Public libraries, public recreation. If you see public roads, the whole public sector has been disparaged and basically damaged and increasingly privatized. And what does privatization mean? Privatization means a particularization of my interest, my special group, my income group, my class, my ethnicity, my race, and so on, that then we can go to school with others like us. And so that's the most damaging part of it all. Some of the simplest things are ignored because maybe they're too difficult. There's a concept in work and in education called time on task. If you look at American schools and you compare them to schools around the world, in Korea or Japan or in Europe, you see the headlines, well, we don't do as well. We're 17th on this list, 16th on this list. But if you go behind those figures and look at the time that their kids in Japan and Korea and Germany and France put in to their schooling, the length of their school year, the length of their school day, the actual number of hours that they put in, it explains the great difference between our two systems. A kid's education declines over the summer. There's a slippage and so on. You ask any teacher, well, you know, I had John, you know, and he was doing great May and June, and now he's back in school, and it's like he forgot all that stuff. Well, of course. Again, you look at the other schools, they don't forget because they're not out of school that long. The most effective thing that a school system like Kent County can do is to examine its before-school program. Maybe there are other agencies involved in that. I mean, obviously, early childhood Headstart have demonstrated, at least in the short run, that they make a difference. Some of those differences really peter out as the kids move through school, regular school, so you have to look at the regular school program. That gets you into the after-school program. Can the regular school program be extended in some way, shape, or form into an after-school period? So to some kids, at least some of the time, the school day is longer. Now, it shouldn't be all fun and games and recreation. It should be a serious education program, but there can be greater diversity of the offering in an after-school setting than there can be in a regular school setting. Same thing for the summer school. Traditionally, summer schools have been for make-up credit or something like that. But there are many other ways to use the summer program. Again, it does involve money. It also involves reaching out into the community and looking at various agencies and organizations that might be willing to do more during these discrete times of preschool, after school, and summer school.
What would be an example?
The college, for example. Right? The college, for example. Washington College probably gives community service credit. And Washington College may be doing some of this already. Could they run some after-school programs? Could they do a pre-college program? Why doesn't Washington College apply for an Upward Bound grant? It's all federal money. It's competitive. You know, it's for 4 years. They could build on a current program they're doing with the Kent County Schools in science and math. There's an Upward Bound science and math program. That would be one example. You've got the Prince Theater in town. They probably would like to work with kids, maybe some kids in an after-school program. None of this is free because nothing is free, but maybe the Prince Theater's in a better position to raise some money from the community to do some of that. But maybe the school system would have to put up something as well.